Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
The name of Jesus is indeed very powerful. In the 1st and 2nd century, saying the name Jesus could cast out demons. It could heal the sick. It could make the lame walk again, the blind to see, the deaf to hear. And although those kind of gifts, I believe, are no longer prevalent, I don't think they happen anymore, that does not mean that the name of Jesus carries any less power. In fact, the name of Jesus carries so much power it can change language. It can change the English language. For example, in the English language we have words that are called synonyms. These are words that are not necessarily spelled the same, not necessarily sound the same, but they have a similar meaning. Anger, rage, they don't sound the same, they're not spelled the same, and yet they have a similar meaning. Homonyms are words that have a similar sound to them when they're spoken, yet they aren't necessarily spelled the same and necessarily don't mean the same thing. However, you add the name Jesus, and it will change certain homonyms to synonyms. The two words that I'm talking about as far as changing from homonyms, words that sound the same, to synonyms, words that mean the same thing, would be wood. The first spelling would be W-O-O-D, wood. And the second would be W-O-U-L-D, wood. Now these are homonyms. They sound the same, don't necessarily mean the same thing, and yet you apply Jesus and it changes it to where they even mean the same thing. Look at the first one, wood, W-O-O-D. It's defined as the flesh of a tree or a large shrub, usually taken from the trunk. Jesus' earthly father, his dad, was a carpenter, so he was no stranger to this wood. He spent a lot of time growing up probably doing a lot of things that revolved around wood. I have no doubt that, especially being the oldest, as he got older, helping his dad, he was probably told to go cut down certain trees, drag them back here, so I can make a table, a chair, bowls, cups, any number of things out of them for me, son. Wood was his life for a while. I don't know if it ever happened, but it wouldn't surprise me once if a Roman soldier at some point came to him and said, "Aren't you a carpenter?" "Yes." "We need some wood for a cross. Do you have any wood that we can use for a cross?" I don't know if it ever happened, like I said, but it wouldn't surprise me. I also wonder sometimes if Jesus, after he knew who he was, really and appreciated it and was able to see what would happen, ever laid his hand against the board and squeezed it, imagining the nail being thrust through his wrist or his hand or however they attached him to it, and wondered what that would be like. He was no stranger to W-O-O-D, wood. And yet, we have another wood, W-O-U-L-D, which is the past tense of the word will, or desire. Jesus, after he had been manifested to the world, and even before, I believe, when he was in heaven with God, before he came, had the desire. He would go. I would go and save mankind, my creation. Paul said something a few weeks ago that I had never considered, but it really had an impact on me. That Judas betraying Jesus in the garden was man betraying God. I had never considered that before. Just the impact of that. The creation betraying the Creator. I just had never thought of that before, and just what a powerful concept that was. But here in this second definition of wood, again we see Jesus. God was not able to look upon and have the relationship with man that he did when man was in the garden before sin. Jesus said, "I would go to the earth and suffer and die after living a perfect sinless life. I would do that if it meant we could be together with man again. I would go and do such that we could be reconciled together. That's a word we don't hear very much today, reconciled, unless we're talking about usually a married couple that's been separated. And a married couple that's been separated that decides they want to be reconciled to one another, both of them have to agree, yeah, I want to get back together with you. You can't have a reconciliation if it's one-sided. If the husband doesn't want to be reconciled to the wife or vice versa, it's not going to be a reconciliation. And yet Jesus said, I would go and make it such. And He has. God has said, I have reconciled myself to man, and however, in order for this reconciliation to be complete, we as man have a responsibility. So Jesus came to this earth, and He worked throughout His life with wood. And then eventually came to the recognition that a different kind of wood would be necessary to complete His task. So if we look at the definitions of the two homonyms, wood and wood, W-O-O-D, the flesh of a tree usually taken from the trunk or large branches. Definition 2, the cause of Jesus' death. Example, He was nailed to a wooden cross, or a cross made of wood, and died. Then we look at the other word, wood, W-O-U-L-D. And in the second the second definition, it becomes a homonym with the other wood. First definition would be the past tense of the word will. Second verse, or the second definition, of W-O-U-L-D, the cause of Jesus' death. His will was to suffer and die so that He can say to us as God, I've done everything I can do. I've done everything necessary. Now it's up to you.